In the opening days of 2025, President Donald Trump shocked the world by imposing a sweeping 25% tariff on all goods imported from Canada and Mexico. The announcement came with little warning, sending shockwaves through diplomatic circles and global markets alike. For decades, North America had enjoyed relatively open borders and robust trade, but this move marked a dramatic break from the past. Trump justified the tariffs with a mix of arguments, citing border security, drug trafficking, and what he called unfair trade practices. The decision shattered the foundation of peaceful North American commerce, upending relationships that had been carefully built over generations. His message was blunt and unmistakable: America first, no matter the cost, even if it meant targeting the nation's closest allies and neighbors. The financial markets immediately reeled. Stocks tumbled, investors scrambled, and uncertainty rippled across the continent as the economic foundation of North America was suddenly thrown into question. Trump claimed that Canada had long taken advantage of the United States, insisting that these tariffs were simply about leveling the playing field and protecting American jobs and industries. Economists and business leaders across the continent sounded the alarm, warning of economic disaster and job losses. But Trump brushed aside their concerns, famously declaring that trade wars were easy to win, and promising that America would emerge stronger. For millions of workers whose livelihoods depended on cross-border trade, the news brought immediate anxiety and confusion. Factory workers, truck drivers, and office employees all faced an uncertain future as supply chains were thrown into chaos overnight. In Canada, the reaction was swift and somber. Blindsided by the sudden escalation, Canadian officials scrambled to respond, realizing their nation now faced an existential threat to its economic stability from its largest trading partner. The tariffs were sweeping and indiscriminate. Everything from cars and auto parts to maple syrup and agricultural goods was suddenly in the crosshairs, threatening entire industries on both sides of the border. The stage was set for a historic confrontation, one that would test Canada's resolve, unity, and economic resilience like never before in its modern history. In the wake of Trump's tariff shock, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government projected calm, but behind closed doors, urgency ruled. A tiger team of diplomats and strategists sprang into action, preparing countermeasures and reaching out to U.S. leaders to highlight the mutual risks. Trudeau flew to Mar-a-Lago, hoping to reason with Trump and avert disaster, armed with data on how deeply the two economies were intertwined. Publicly, Canada avoided inflammatory rhetoric, focusing instead on unity and national pride. Diplomats launched a campaign across the U.S., reminding Americans how many of their jobs depended on Canadian trade. The government braced Canadians for economic pain, framing the conflict as a defense of sovereignty. It was a tense, strategic calm before the coming storm. The U.S. Canada economic relationship is massive. $2.7 billion in goods and services cross the border every day. This isn't just trade, it's millions of jobs and tightly woven supply chains. For 36 U.S. states, Canada is the top export market, making Trump's tariffs a direct hit on American interests too. Canada supplies the U.S. with most of its imported oil, electricity, and key minerals. Disrupting this flow risked chaos for both economies, raising prices and threatening jobs on both sides. The tariffs weren't just a blow to Canada, they were a self-inflicted wound for the U.S. Any pain for Canada would inevitably boomerang back to American consumers and businesses. The handshake that built North American prosperity was now a fistfight. The very foundation of the continent's economy was suddenly at risk. When Trump's tariffs hit in March, Canada struck back with precision and purpose. The government didn't just react, they carefully analyzed which American industries would feel the most pain, and crafted a response that was both strategic and symbolic. Retaliatory tariffs targeted politically sensitive U.S. products, bourbon, cheese, and more, aimed at key states that were crucial to American political power. By hitting these products, Canada sent a clear message to Washington. Every action would have a consequence. Canada matched every U.S. tariff dollar for dollar, showing it wouldn't be bullied. The government made it clear that it would not back down, and that Canadian workers and businesses would not stand alone. The conflict escalated when the U.S. targeted Canada's vital auto sector. In response, Canada imposed tariffs on American vehicles, raising the stakes for both economies and threatening jobs on both sides of the border. The message was unmistakable. Canada would absorb pain to defend its core interests, even if it meant short-term hardship for its own people. The government rallied public support, launching a nationwide Buy Canadian campaign and providing relief to affected industries. Communities came together, determined to weather the storm and support local businesses. Retaliatory tariffs became a political weapon, pressuring U.S. lawmakers to push back against Trump's policies. American businesses and consumers began to feel the impact, and the debate in Washington grew louder. Canada's strategy was bold and risky, but it was the only way to stand up to a superpower neighbor. The stakes were high and the outcome uncertain, but Canada refused to be intimidated. The country's resolve surprised the White House, forcing American officials to reconsider their approach and acknowledge Canada's determination. The fight was no longer just about trade, it was about sovereignty, national pride, and the right to chart an independent course. Canada's unity and determination became its greatest assets, as citizens, businesses, and leaders stood shoulder to shoulder. The world watched as the two nations dug in for a prolonged battle, with global markets and international partners anxiously monitoring every move. The rules of North American trade had been rewritten overnight, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the continent's borders. As the trade war raged, Canada elected Mark Carney, a respected economist, as Prime Minister in a snap March election. Carney's arrival marked a shift. He brought a firm, analytical approach and framed the crisis as a threat to the global rules-based order. He rallied Canadians, promising not to back down and traveling the country to reassure workers and businesses. Carney's calm, fact-driven leadership reassured a nation under siege. With a strengthened mandate after a second election, Carney signaled to Washington that Canada's stance was unwavering. He ramped up international diplomacy, building a coalition against Trump's protectionism. Carney became the face of global resistance to America First policies. Canada, often seen as a quiet middle power, was now punching above its weight. Tensions peaked in May when Trump suggested on social media that Canada should become the 51st U.S. state. Outrage swept Canada, and Carney flew to Washington for a high-stakes meeting. Looking Trump in the eye, Carney declared, "Canada is not for sale." The statement became a national rallying cry, reinforcing Canada's sovereignty and resolve. Carney made it clear, Canada would not sacrifice its principles or identity. The standoff was about more than trade, it was a clash of worldviews. Power versus principle. The meeting didn't resolve the dispute, but it forced Washington to recognize Canada's unity and determination. The tone from the White House began to shift. Canada's red line was clear, and the world took notice. The path to resolution was still uncertain, but Canada had drawn a line in the sand. Just as trade talks showed progress, Canada's plan for a 3% digital services tax on U.S. tech giants triggered a new crisis. Trump called the tax discriminatory and suspended all negotiations, plunging relations back into turmoil. Carney faced a tough choice: stand firm on the tax or risk the broader economic relationship. After intense debate, Carney paused the tax as a gesture to restart talks, framing it as a temporary, strategic move. The decision broke the impasse, and Trump agreed to resume negotiations. The episode highlighted the fragility of the situation and the need for careful, pragmatic leadership. Canada's willingness to compromise on one front kept the bigger fight alive. The trade war's stakes had never been higher. The world watched as the two countries edged back from the brink. The showdown reached its peak at the G7 summit in Alberta, a high-stakes gathering where the world's attention was fixed on the tense encounter between Carney and Trump. The atmosphere was electric, with global leaders and media watching every move, knowing that the outcome could reshape international trade. Canada's carefully targeted tariffs had struck at the heart of key U.S. industries, from manufacturing to agriculture. As the economic pain deepened, Trump faced mounting pressure from business leaders, workers, and politicians back home, all demanding urgent action to end the standoff. Meanwhile, U.S. courts began to question the legality of Trump's tariffs, and his political allies grew restless, demanding relief for their constituents. The administration found itself increasingly isolated, with legal and political challenges mounting on all sides. In a dramatic and unexpected reversal, Trump was forced to suspend the tariffs and announced a willingness to negotiate a new trade deal. The world watched as the U.S. administration shifted its stance, signaling a major diplomatic victory for Canada. Canada's unified strategic response had compelled the U.S. to return to the negotiating table. The Canadian team's discipline and resolve were widely praised, both at home and abroad. The crisis became a defining moment for national unity and confidence. Canadians from all walks of life stood together, setting aside differences to defend their country's interests as never before. The outcome was a powerful lesson in how to confront aggressive trade actions with resolve, careful planning, and a willingness to stand firm under pressure. Canada's approach became a model for other nations facing similar challenges. Trump had underestimated both Canada's leverage and its character. The world saw that Canada could not be easily pushed around, and that its leaders were prepared to defend their people's future. The 2025 trade conflict was painful and costly, but in the end, Canada emerged stronger, more united, and more confident in its place on the world stage. The nation proved to itself, and to the world, that it had the courage, determination, and unity to defend its interests, no matter the odds.